of the Hamas attack in Israel, the question is everywhere. How did the fabled Israeli intelligence services not know? And that in turn has produced the other hand-wringing nightmare. How often in the last half-century have the world's best intelligence services not seen the horror coming? And of course, the answer is disturbingly simple to both questions. They did see it coming. Israeli intelligence did see it coming. The Russians did see Ukrainian resistance coming. U.S. intelligence did see 9/11 coming, did see Pearl Harbor coming. The British did see Hitler's assault on Europe coming. And each time, the intelligence services reported what they saw to the politicians in charge either of their own agencies or of the government as a whole. And what they saw was deemed not to really exist because it did not fit with the particular government's agenda. Now, the respected Israeli newspaper Haaretz reports that Egyptian intelligence vaguely warned the Israelis that something big was coming from Middle East terror groups, but that the Netanyahu government focused on the West Bank. An Israeli news network says there was a warning, and its Israeli government sources confirm that. But they say something big was hardly actionable information. The Associated Press had the quote first from an unnamed source yesterday morning. Ynet News names the Egyptian officer, the head of intelligence, Abbas Kamel, quotes him as saying he warned Netanyahu personally by phone, quote, something unusual, a terrible operation was about to unfold, puts a date on this call 10 days before the attack. The Washington Post stitched it all together, quote, the Israeli Defense Forces issued rare public statements in recent months warning that military deterrence was deteriorating. Netanyahu and radical members of his cabinet derided the officials as part of the protest movement, and the protesters as, quote, anarchists, asserting that the status quo with the Palestinians would hold, unquote. Reuters adds that when Israel heard about new security problems, it redeployed troops from Gaza to the West Bank. How vague the Egyptian warning really was, how much like you only telling your doctor, I don't feel well, and supplying no other details, and asking him to diagnose you anyway, that remains to be seen, but in some respects it is almost irrelevant. The Netanyahu government saw everything from an unmoving and through an unshakable prism. Gaza was stable, at worst a stalemate. The West Bank was the focus. In fact, it was the focus of the hatred that has fueled Netanyahu's government and kept it in power despite unprecedented protest by an increasingly suppressed majority in that nation. The West Bank was where Israelis brutalized the non-Israeli population and where the self-fulfilling prophecy had to be fed. The danger was there, so the brutality had to be there. So the only increasing danger could be there. So the increasing attention had to be focused there. So if there was something big or something unusual or military deterrence was deteriorating, it had to be there and not Gaza. This is not to defend Hamas, nor to present the residents of the West Bank as martyrs. This is about what my old friend George Carlin correctly identified as the oxymoron of military intelligence. And it is as old as military, or at least national intelligence itself. What should be the first rule of intelligence always turns out to, in fact, be the first thing those interpreting it forget. You are seeing the horizon as if in an overnight electrical storm. For one split second, lightning illuminates everything blindingly, and then you are immediately plunged back into darkness. But that word, blindingly, is overwhelmingly and sometimes painfully precise. What you are seeing can inform you or it can blind you. You cannot superimpose your assumptions, your conclusions, your aspirations, even your previous information on top of what you see. You have enough to do as it is just to analyze what is seen so briefly and in such a distorting light. Thus, if the director of the Egyptian General Intelligence Directorate warns you of a terrible operation, you cannot take what he says and attach to it the West Bank. Just as if your intelligence agencies and those of your cousins tell you of al-Qaeda chatter, You cannot then take what they say and attach your presumption that there are more overseas targets, because that's what they did last time, or attach that the intelligence must be wrong, because who would learn only to fly a plane, not how to take off or land it? Or attach that, sure, bin Laden is determined to attack in U.S., but so what? So are a lot of people. Or attach that the real force behind the threat has to be Iraq, because that's what your administration entered the White House itching to fight. If you're about to invade Ukraine and your military leadership tells you you will win in 48 hours, or you tell your military leadership you will win in 48 hours, but your intelligence forces tell you the Ukrainians will fight to the last man, you cannot just ignore them. If you have made a deal with Hitler at Munich to give him Czechoslovakia, and yet your least favorite member of your own political party keeps leaking intelligence that Hitler is doubling and tripling and quadrupling his aircraft fleet and his munitions and his men in arms, you cannot assume that Hitler is the man of his word and your hated rival is a madman just because you said you had obtained from Hitler peace for our time. And if you have decided that the assistant chief of the air service is trying to force you to buy more of these useless aeroplanes, and he returns from Asia and writes a 324-page report in 1924 predicting that the Japanese will someday declare war on your country and conduct a sneak attack on Hawaii by air, you cannot demote him and court-martial him and state, since he so notoriously overestimates what could be done with air power by the United States, it is not improbable that he has likewise overestimated what Japan could do. This is not very sophisticated analysis. Then again, the failures of ego, failures of lack of imagination, failures in which you are more concerned with hiding the fact that your first conclusion was wrong when only your second conclusion actually matters. These failures are pretty unsophisticated as well. These failures, the newest of which is Gaza, and for which at least 1,000 Israelis have paid for their lives in what was the equivalent of 3 or 4 9/11s. They are the common failures of confirmation bias and hubris and narrow-mindedness and that always suicidal belief that you not only know everything, but nobody else knows anything. Netanyahu was warned by his own intelligence, by Egyptian intelligence. Haaretz reported last night that so far there had been only one denial about that from the Israeli government, Netanyahu's own. Everyone else was saying it was too early to ask about those failures, that now is the time for retaliation and defense and unity and, I hate to again quote comedy, but as they put it in Monty Python and the Holy Grail, let's not bicker and argue about who killed who. The good news in the context of the Gaza Strip, wrote the right-wing newspaper Israeli Hayom last month, is that neither Israel nor Hamas want to see hostilities escalate, each for its own reasons, unquote. Of course that was true. It had to be true. Didn't it? Here, let's rephrase the assessment of Senators Tommy Tuberville of Alabama and Rand Paul of Kentucky. Tuberville is not holding up promotions in the military over abortion. Paul is not holding ambassadorial appointments in the Middle East over his COVID delusions. Tuberville and Paul could not have contributed more to the chaos in the Middle East and the death there if they had actually been working for Hamas. Change the Senate rules, blow up the filibuster, deny these clowns the opportunity to again cancel the American military over their performative acts. And by the way, while we're at it, do something about Tuberville's ears. I cannot stop thinking about the late Pee Wee Herman every time I see him. It is comforting to see Trump publicly identifying the true villains here. Forbes magazine. He was obsessed yesterday, says Forbes took it off its Forbes 400 list. He's no longer on the Forbes 400, which is fake anyway, and it's an antique, he calls it. And anyway, they're part of the conspiracy against him. Quote, they are working with the racist and highly incompetent Attorney General of New York. And Dementia J. Trump really did attack Forbes magazine twice yesterday as the Middle East continued to unfold. And he attacked Letitia James 3 times. And it may finally be that he is spiraling out of all control mentally and emotionally. Not that that's a long trip. And even his appointed judge in Florida, Eileen Cannon, is going to have a hard time doing what he wants in the classified documents case. You will recall his attorneys moved last week to postpone the trial there until after the election, because they won't be able to study the classified information in a secure location in time for trial next May. And yesterday, Jack Smith reminded the judge in a filing that this is the second time Trump has filed this exact motion, and A, she already ruled against him the first time, and B, the case against Trump is not about the classified documents and info, it's about the non-classified documents and info, and C, the classified documents and info, quote, a small fraction of the discovery that is among the most highly classified material, that will all be cleared to view in a regular old run-of-the-mill location, and that the government, quote, expects even those materials to be available for review and discussion by cleared counsel this week. As we get inside the 1 week mark to the Tanya Chutkan hearing on the gag order in Washington next Monday, it is possible that Trump's behavior will get even stranger. What happens to somebody with that much wrong with them when you add in whiplash? I do not know. After running poor, deluded Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as a Trojan horse who was expected to hurt Joe Biden in the Democratic primaries, or at least wind up endorsing Trump at the end, boom goes the polling. RFK Jr. is attracting Trump voters and disaffected Republicans. And he's just bailed out of the Democratic race and will try it as an independent. And suddenly, RNC chairwoman Ronna McDaniel dismisses him as a Democrat in independence clothing, your typical elitist liberal. And the last known Trump spokesman, Stephen Chung, has so completely run out of Trump bullshit that he could only say, quote, an RFK candidacy is nothing more than a vanity project. Which is true. Not only true, but that was the reason Trump selected him to do this. And one is left with the specter of Frankenstein's lab assistants trying to poke the monster with fire while trying to blame each other for getting them that brain marked Abby normal. And lastly, domestically, didn't somebody tell you last week not to believe that assumption that one Kevin Owen McCarthy was not a candidate to become the next Speaker of the House of Representatives? Even before Gaza, the obviousness of his own Frankensteinian revivification attempt came when it was universally reported he was going to resign from the House like all terrible Republican ex-speakers have done since time immemorial. And then he very emphatically said he ain't going nowhere. Since Gaza, he held a Monday morning press briefing, just as he would have if he had still been Speaker, asked if under the different world circumstances he would now run again for the office. He refused to answer. That, friend, is a yes. Since Gaza, Republicans who stabbed him in the back have an excuse to pull out their knives and say, oops, the car lurched. Congressman Darrell Car Alarm Issa has endorsed Jim Jordan, who would, of course, uphold the Republican tradition of speakers connected to the rape of scholastic wrestlers. But last night, Issa said if McCarthy tries to regain the speakership, he will support him and, quote, I would vote for him, and I believe that Jim Jordan would vote for him. And the tell of tells, Congressman Steve Womack of Arkansas endorsed Steve Scalise. And no, it does not have to be for any better reason than the fact that they're both named Steve. But it's what he said next that clinches this for me. Quote, Steve Scalise is our next best option after Kevin McCarthy. I don't know how the Republicans game their own voting system for Speaker of the House, but that is all that they're good at. They are not convinced Scalise is either healthy or tough enough, and even in their caucus, Jordan is rightly viewed as an inmate, not a warden. I said it last Wednesday, and now I will say it louder, because the key point in my theoretical is no longer just a deal for Ukraine aid. It is now a deal for Ukraine and Israel aid. He might still get the job back. as I said last Wednesday, especially if they actually give Elise Stefanik or this clown McHenry or another one of these goobers a shot at it, and especially if McCarthy really would turn around and make a deal with the Democrats this time, predicated on aid for Ukraine, editor's note, and Israel, some palatable fix for the problems on the border, and most importantly, giving McCarthy the chance to metaphorically attack Matt Gaetz's privates with pruning shears every day through the next election and turn him into some kind of congressional Sisyphus, only making it hurt more. Also of interest here, Elon Musk, Ronna McDaniel, Martha McCallum, John Roberts of Fox, Nancy Mace, and Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. And what do they have in common? The disaster unfolds in Gaza, and not one of them knows how not to say something unbelievably stupid about it. Each has made it into a supersized edition of Worst Persons. That's next. This is Countdown.
This is Countdown with Keith Olbermann.
Still ahead on Countdown. Ever seen the movie A Christmas Story? Have you ever seen it and said, why are they doing a movie about the last day of the year I spent in the 4th grade? Ever seen it and had the real-life bully come up to you and ask, did we have a fight in the 4th grade? Things I promised not to tell coming up. First time for the daily roundup of the miscreants, morons, and Dunning-Kruger effect specimens who constitute today's supersized edition of the Worst Persons in the World. The bronze is a tie. John Roberts and Martha McCallum of Fox. These are the alleged non-commentary straight news people, which mean they only whore themselves out for the Republican Party just a couple of times a day rather than, constantly. The White House called a lid just before noon yesterday. Anybody with an IQ above 27 knows that a lid means there will be no more news conferences today, no more public events by the president, nothing for you to cover. A lid before noon means the president will be too busy the rest of the day doing president stuff to be interrupted by, news or even Fox. But of course, anybody with an IQ above 27 does not watch Fox or work there. So first Roberts puts out a tweet, then McCallum asks a Pentagon spokesman in disbelief, why did they call a lid? Roberts' tweet reads, with war raging in Israel, the White House called a lid for Joe Biden at 11:46 a.m. It's skeevy even for Fox, even for John Roberts, who used to be a VJ. And not in this country even, in Canada. Ugh. No offense, Canada. The runners-up, it's a tie, but if you're going to be a VJ, you're not going to be a VJ in Canada. I can hear Strombolopoulos now. The runners-up, it's a tie. One politician from each party, Governor Whitmer of Michigan and that idiot Nancy Mace. Congresswoman from South Carolina. Mace first. Mace makes a big deal out of how bravely and frequently she stands up for sexual abuse survivors, like she's going for a franchise or something. After torpedoing Kevin McCarthy and pushing for Jim Jordan as the new speaker, she was rightly asked, quote, do the past allegations about Jim Jordan, that he turned a blind eye to sexual abuse, give you reservation? And her answer was, quote, I'm not familiar or aware with that. He's not indicted or anything that I'm aware of, so I don't know anything. If you don't know anything, how do you know he's not indicted? She's then reminded of the details. The Ohio State University allegations? And Mace comes back with the surprisingly honest answer, I don't know anything, unquote. She's not just a dope, she's a disingenuous dope. On the other hand, I do think we should give her credit for actually getting out of bed to do this interview. God knows, Nancy Mace thinks she should get credit every time she gets out of bed to do anything but bed stuff. And Mace is tied here with Governor Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan. I will confess, I watched her during the run-up to the midterms last year, and I thought, here is a future leader of the Democratic Party and a possibility for national office. And then came the attack on Israel, and she tweeted at 5:34 Eastern Saturday afternoon, you know how sometimes a politician's statement on a tragedy or a disaster or an event seems a little generic or a little boilerplate? This is not only the worst one I've ever heard, I had to check it like 4 times to really believe they sent this out. Quote, I have been in touch with communities impacted by what's happening in the region. It is abhorrent. My heart is with all those impacted. We need peace in this region. Unquote. Seriously? In touch with communities impacted by what's happening in the region? My heart is with all those impacted. We need peace in this region? What happened? Where? I mean, that could be about Hamas and Israel, or fistfights erupting in whatever NCAA basketball regional the University of Michigan has been assigned to. Pathetic. Or let me rephrase that phrase, pathetic. I have assessed the communication involved and believed it inappropriate, and out of an abundance of caution, I urge the relevant politician to reconsider, consult, and contemplate. Prices higher west of the Rockies. Your mileage may vary. But our winners, it's a tie! Elon Musk and Ronna McDaniel. There are some people who should stick to generic boilerplate. Musk is one of them. Instead, on Saturday, he wrote, for following the war in real time, @War Monitors and @SentDefender are good. Half of the replies included screenshots of a survey on who the Iranian people would pick to lead their country if, they had elections there, to which that one that he recommended, @War Monitors, the @War Monitors account had replied, quote, mind your own business, Jew, unquote. And another in which the same account posted a meme about Sarah Silverman joking about killing Jesus, and the @War Monitors account added, quote, least hypocritical Jew, unquote. But @War Monitors pays Elon $8 a month, so they must be good. And of course, there's Ronna Romney McDaniel, still somehow chairwoman of the Republican National Committee. I'm assuming this could only be because Musk doesn't want the job. Smoked in the midterms in 2018 on her second year. She then spent money to defend Trump's conspiracy with Russia. She lost in 2020. She was smoked in the midterms in 2022. Her leading presidential candidate is now facing 91 criminal counts. She's killing it. And of course, her comments on breaking news burnish the reputation of the Republican Party on a daily basis. For instance, on Saturday, she got on Fox, and in that lovely, deviated septum Charlie Brown teacher's voice, she blamed Biden for the attack on Israel and added, quote, I think this is a great opportunity for our candidates. And I think, Ronna, you should go to hell, but not before saying, repeat after me, I have been in touch with communities impacted by what's happening in the region. It is abhorrent. My heart is with all those impacted. We need peace in this region. End recording. Ronna, she's there to make Uncle Mitt look like Winston Churchill, Romney McDaniel, and Elon, I forgot not to recommend my go-to anti-Semitic accounts to the public, Musk. Today's worst persons in the world! Delete your accounts! To the number one story on the countdown, and my favorite subject, me and things I promised not to tell. As a preface, let me just be clear about this. I was never a bully as a kid. I mention this in the context of this question. Have you ever watched a movie and there's a scene in it and you go all pale because it really happened to you? Have you seen A Christmas Story? The movie TBS runs all day, every Christmas, little Ralphie and the Red Ryder BB gun, and you'll shoot your eye out. The scene where Ralphie completely loses it and takes down the bully and bloodies him, swearing a blue streak. Yeah, that was me. When I was a kid in Hastings-on-Hudson, New York, I was considered above average in intelligence. Clearly, I have disproved this nearly every day of my adult life, but they didn't know that then. The main results of this assessment were I was moved into a class with kids a year older than me, sometimes 2 years, and I was still bigger than they were, and I had no patience. If I was talking and they were not paying attention, I got shovey. Like today. Like I said, I was never a bully. I just had a Bugs Bunny concept of violence. So my folks had me talk to a psychologist, and I quickly caught on, and I stopped shoving or hitting or pushing or anything. In fact, the advice was too good. The doctor turned me into a little New Yorker Gandhi. When the day came in the 4th grade, as it does for all kids at some point, that somebody else shoved me, I did nothing. I had been taught by the doctor, no shoving, Keith. This quickly deteriorated into the inevitable situation in which I got bullied. This went on for most of a school year, and no matter what my folks said, no matter how frustrated I got, I would not hit back. But this was also the same year that I became a baseball fan and a baseball card collector. And as the 4th grade ended, literally the next to last day of class, some kid sold me his entire baseball card collection, maybe 1,000 cards. Maybe it cost me $2. They were in a big paper shopping bag, and after a trip to the bathroom, I returned to my desk to discover that the bag had been stolen. As this penultimate school day ended and we all filed out of the classroom down several flights of stairs to the building exit, which opened onto the flat, beautiful tar macadam playground, my main antagonist, the lead bully, the Scut Farkas of my 4th grade, shouted up from maybe 6 or 7 steps below me on the stairs, "Hey, Keith, what do you think of my baseball card collection?" He then held the bag of my cards aloft. Suddenly, my own rage and my opportunity merged into one shining moment. The bully was now on the ground floor landing of the school, moving towards the door that opened onto the playground. But I was still on the stairs, 6 or 7 steps up, and it dawned upon me that now those stairs made me at least 2 feet taller than this guy was, and that gravity had become my accomplice. I literally threw myself forward off the stairs. I landed on him, my knees connecting with his chest. The force of my leap pushed us both through the open door. We hit the playground with a thud, him on his back, me on his chest with my knees and the full weight of my body pinning down his elbows and upper arms. The most he could do was slap at me without aim or force. This is basically the visual of the Ralphie beats up the bully scene in A Christmas Story, only there was no snow because it was June. And I went to town. All that nice pacifist deprogramming went out the window. The bully had stolen my baseball cards. I punched him repeatedly, even as a serene clarity overtook me. I was displeased, but I was not blind with anger. As I was contemplating this, suddenly I felt the large hands under my arms of the gym teacher, Mr. Hood. Mr. Hood lifted me off the bully and said something, and I said, matter-of-factly, "Why did you do that? I'm not finished yet." I shook him off, and to my surprise, he fell into some low hedges. I turned back to the bully, who was still supine on the beautiful, freshly resurfaced playground. I assumed the same posture I had before, but instead of hitting him, now I simply grabbed his head and began to lift it up and then pound it down. Lift it up and then pound it down. Lift it up and then pound it down. I became aware at this point that the entire 4th grade had formed a gasping semicircle around us, and now I thought of them. I'm a giver. He bullied them, too, boys and girls alike. And we had, as I figured out at that moment, 8 years and 1 day left of school to deal with this bully. It would be easiest, I concluded, that if I ended his bullying right there. So I kept pounding his head into the tar macadam surface, so he'd never forget. Or maybe forget a lot. And then I felt 4 large hands under my arms. Mr. Hood had finally disentangled himself from the shrubbery, and my mother had appeared somehow, just as in the movie. They were finally able to overpower me. Since my folks had spent the year trying to get me to do what I had just done, they were cool with all this. I believe we went to get some ice cream. Somehow I didn't even get punished for pushing the gym teacher, Mr. Hood. So now that I think about it, from that day on, Mr. Hood always looked warily at me. And then he transferred to another school. The next day, the last day of fourth grade, I walked into my classroom, Mrs. Wolf's class, really not thinking about the previous day's dry run for a movie scene. All the boys in the class were huddled in a far corner of the room, whispering. After I sat at my desk, the one who had collaborated the least with the bully and his toadies, Tom Charlap, came over and said, Keith, I thought you might like these. And he handed me a stack of baseball cards. I was very moved. I said, thank you, Tom. And soon, to my bewilderment, every one of the other boys brought me tribute. Baseball card tribute. Some of the cards were still unopened in the packs and had clearly been obtained that morning at a local candy store. Of course, I had now been removed from some kind of cosmic precursor to the film A Christmas Story, and I had instead been placed in some kind of cosmic precursor to the film The Godfather, the scene of his daughter's wedding. Needless to say, there was no more bullying. Although, as always, there's a postscript. I left that school after the 7th grade, but 20 years after that class of kids graduated, a girl I had stayed friendly with, she was with me in college, invited me to what was their and kinda my reunion, and it was transcendent. I also made the 30th anniversary, and in 2010, Saturday, October 23rd, 2010, 12 years ago yesterday, I went to the 35th anniversary. It was held in, of all places, a restaurant in my hometown across the street from a 2-story building once owned by my dad, where my grandmother and grandfather once lived. It was a Saturday night in October. It was frosty, misty, the first night that truly hinted at the inevitability of winter, and I was half an hour early. And I sat there on a bench between the restaurant and the municipal parking lot, and my whole youth replayed itself in front of my eyes. Some sadness, mostly happiness, mostly eager anticipation of seeing these friends of my youngest youth once more. And then out of the distance, his familiar, skinny form, irregularly illuminated by the streetlights, walking towards me out of the fog, was the bully. Keith! Big hug. You really made it! Some small talk, all of it warm, completely in keeping with the O. Henry quality of the fog and the chill in the air and the reunion. And then he said, hey, you know what? I told my mother that you were going to be here supposedly tonight, and she said, son, maybe you shouldn't go. And I said, why not, Ma? And she said, well, you and Keith had some problems when you were kids, 4th or 5th grade. And I said I had no idea what she was talking about. Did we have problems? Did we have a fight or something? Time stood still. What do you say to him? It felt like I considered the options for several minutes. In reality, it was just a few seconds of hesitation, if that long. It dawned on me. I won that battle in 1967. This was now 2010. There was no reason to relitigate this. If he was faking not remembering it, I should go along with him and also fake not remembering it. If he really didn't remember, it was possible that this was because I kept pounding his head against the playground surface in June 1967. Oh, I'm sure we had a fight, I said finally. I mean, every kid in that class had a fight. I mean, in the 4th grade, I fought Brian Rubin one day, and then I fought with him against Gordon Craig and Ricky Wester the next day. So what? He smiled. I smiled. Another figure emerged from a newly parked car. Hey, look, it's Katzenstein. Let's go inside. I'll buy both you guys a drink. We had a great time. I never brought up the fight. But truth be told, it did take all of my self-control to not ask one question of everybody I saw. And that one question would have been, hey, anybody know whatever happened to that gym teacher, Mr. Hood? I've done all the damage I can do here. Thank you for listening. Countdown has come to you from the Vin Scully studio at the Olbermann Broadcasting Empire in New York. The music you've heard was, for the most part, arranged, produced, and performed by the Countdown musical directors Brian Ray and John Philip Chanel. Brian Ray handled the guitars, bass, and drums. John Philip Chanel did the orchestration and keyboards, and it was produced by TKO Brothers. Other music, including other Beethoven tunes, arranged and performed by No Horns Allowed. The sports music is courtesy of ESPN Inc. and was written by Mitch Warren Davis. We call it the Olbermann theme from ESPN2. Our satirical and pithy musical comments were by Nancy Faust, the best baseball stadium organist ever. Our announcer today was my friend Kenny Mayne, and everything else was pretty much my fault. So that's Countdown for this, the 1008th day since Donald Trump's first attempted coup against the democratically elected government of the United States. Convict him now while we still can. The next scheduled countdown is tomorrow. We are here 4 days a week, bulletins as the news warrants. Till then, I'm Keith Olbermann. Good morning, good afternoon, good night, and good luck.